I never thought my son's wedding would end with me walking out. But sometimes life takes unexpected turns that force you to stand up for yourself. The moment my daughter-in-law Sarah asked me to leave during my own toast is forever etched into my memory. I had spent months planning this perfect day for them, investing not just my heart but also my savings to give them the wedding of their dreams. Everyone was dressed in their finest attire. The venue was decorated with white roses and gold accents, and the atmosphere was filled with joy and laughter until that moment. Sarah had always been polite to my face, but I'd noticed small signs of resentment building up over the months of wedding planning. That evening, as I stood up to give my heartfelt toast, glass raised high, surrounded by friends and family, I had no idea my world was about to shatter. Sarah's face changed the moment I mentioned how proud I was of my son's accomplishments. I saw something flash in her eyes, a mixture of jealousy and anger that seemed to come out of nowhere. I was only 2 sentences into my speech when she stood up abruptly, the screech of her chair against the floor silencing the room. "I think we've heard enough from you," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The room fell silent, and I could feel dozens of eyes on me, waiting to see how I would react to this unexpected humiliation. My son James sat frozen beside her, his face a mask of shock and embarrassment. I stood there, champagne glass still raised, wondering if I had somehow misheard her, or if this was some kind of terrible joke. But there was no mistaking the coldness in her voice, or the satisfied smirk that played at the corner of her lips. "This is our special day, not yours," Sarah continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "Maybe it would be better if you just left now." My hand began to tremble, causing ripples in the champagne I was still holding. The guests around me shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure where to look or what to do. My sister Alina, sitting at a nearby table, half rose from her chair, her face contorted with anger on my behalf. James finally seemed to snap out of his stupor and placed a hand on Sarah's arm, whispering something urgently in her ear. But she shook him off, her eyes never leaving my face, as she waited for my response. Time seemed to slow down as I processed what was happening, being publicly humiliated at an event I had poured my heart and finances into. I carefully set my glass down on the table, my mind racing through options. I could feel the heat rising to my cheeks as embarrassment gave way to a calm, cold anger. Everyone was waiting for the drama to unfold. Would I cry? Would I shout? Would I make a scene? Instead, I smiled politely, nodded once, and said, "Of course, it's your day." The shocked expression on Sarah's face told me she had expected tears, or protests, not dignified acceptance. As I gathered my small clutch purse, I caught James's eye. His face was a mixture of shame and confusion, silently pleading with me to understand. I had raised him to be stronger than this, to stand up for what was right, but in that moment, he chose to remain seated next to his new wife. The band had stopped playing, and the clinking of my heels against the marble floor echoed through the silent reception hall as I walked toward the exit. What no one knew then was that I wasn't just walking away from a wedding reception, I was walking toward a decision that would change everything. As I pushed open the heavy doors of the venue and stepped into the cool evening air, I felt an unexpected sense of freedom wash over me. The valet looked confused when he saw me leaving so early, but quickly recovered and hurried to retrieve my car. While waiting, I pulled out my phone and made a quick call to my bank. "I need to cancel several payments immediately," I told the after-hours service representative. I had arranged to pay for the open bar, the catering for the second half of the evening, and the honeymoon suite at the Grand Plaza Hotel, all as surprise gifts that the couple didn't even know about yet. The representative confirmed they could stop the payments since they hadn't been processed yet. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Mitchell?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. I watched as guests inside laughed and danced through the venue's windows, completely unaware of what I was doing. The drive home gave me time to process what had happened and solidify my resolve. I had spent nearly $45,000 on this wedding money. I had saved over years working extra shifts as a nurse. James was my only child, and after losing his father to cancer 5 years ago, I wanted to make his special day perfect. I remembered how Sarah had insisted on the most expensive venue in town, claiming that anything less would be settling. I had agreed because I wanted them to have beautiful memories, not realizing that I wouldn't be considered part of those memories. When I arrived home, I kicked off my heels and poured myself a glass of wine. My phone was already lighting up, with messages from family members who had witnessed the scene. My sister Elena was particularly furious, sending text after text about Sarah's unforgivable behavior. I didn't respond to any of them yet. I needed time to think. I was just settling into my favorite armchair when my phone rang. It was James. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let him feel the weight of his silence when his wife had humiliated me, but I couldn't. He was still my son. "Mom," his voice cracked when I answered. "What happened?" "The bar just announced they're closing because payment was cancelled, and the catering staff is packing up." I took a slow sip of my wine before answering, keeping my voice steady and calm. "I'm simply respecting Sarah's wishes, James. She made it clear I wasn't welcome at your celebration. So naturally, my contributions aren't welcome either." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear Sarah's voice in the background, demanding to know what was going on. "But Mom, we can't afford to pay for all this right now," he finally said, panic evident in his voice. "That sounds like a problem you and Sarah will need to solve together as a married couple," I replied, surprised by my own composure. "Consider it your first test of marriage, figuring out how to handle unexpected challenges." I could hear Sarah getting louder in the background, and then she was on the phone, her voice shrill with anger. "You can't do this. You promised to pay for these things. Everyone is watching us scramble now. Is that what you wanted?" I let her finish her tirade before responding quietly. "I was also promised respect as the mother of the groom. We all face disappointments, Sarah." I ended the call despite her continued protests and turned my phone to silent. Outside my window, the moon was bright and full, illuminating my garden, where I had taught James to plant his first seeds as a child. I wondered when exactly I had lost that sweet boy to this woman who treated me with such disregard. The next morning, I woke to dozens of missed calls and messages. Most were from James and Sarah, but there were also supportive texts from friends and family who had witnessed Sarah's behavior. My brother-in-law Frank had apparently stepped in to pay for some of the reception costs after I left, preventing a complete disaster. I was making coffee when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see James standing on my porch, alone and looking exhausted in his rumpled suit from yesterday. When I opened the door, the words tumbled out of him before I could speak. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have said something when Sarah spoke to you that way. I was just shocked and didn't know how to react." His eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep, and despite everything, my heart ached for him. I stepped aside to let him in, noticing how his shoulders slumped with relief that I hadn't turned him away. Over coffee at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with homework and discussed his college applications, James explained what had happened after I left. The reception had descended into chaos when the bar closed and the caterers began packing up the food that was meant for the second half of the evening. Sarah's parents, who had contributed minimally to the wedding despite their comfortable financial situation, refused to cover the unexpected costs. "Sarah was humiliated," James said, staring into his coffee cup. "She kept saying everyone would remember our wedding for all the wrong reasons." I nodded, letting him continue without interruption. "We didn't even know you were paying for the honeymoon suite until the hotel called to say the reservation was cancelled. We ended up sleeping at Sarah's parents' house instead of having our first night together at the Grand Plaza." A part of me felt a twinge of guilt, but I reminded myself that actions have consequences. "James," I said gently after he finished speaking, "I've always taught you that respect is non-negotiable. I didn't raise you to stand by while someone treats others poorly, especially your family." His eyes filled with tears as he nodded, acknowledging the truth in my words. "Sarah has always been a bit jealous of our relationship," he admitted. "She says I'm too attached to you and that you're too involved in our lives. But that doesn't excuse how she acted." I reached across the table and took his hand, noticing how much it resembled his father's strong, with long fingers that used to play piano so beautifully. "Marriage is about partnership, about supporting each other and facing the world as a team," I told him. "But that doesn't mean blindly supporting wrong behavior. True love includes holding each other accountable." James stayed for another hour, and we talked more openly than we had in months. It became clear that there were issues in his relationship with Sarah that went deeper than her behavior toward me. She had been pressuring him to move across the country away from me, despite his reluctance to leave his job and support system. "She says, we need a fresh start, just the two of us," he explained. I chose my words carefully, not wanting to drive a wedge between them, but concerned about what I was hearing. A fresh start can be wonderful, but running away from problems doesn't solve them. Those problems just reappear in new locations. James nodded slowly, considering my words. When he finally left, he hugged me tightly and whispered, "I'm going to fix this, Mom, I promise." I watched him drive away, wondering what fixing it would mean, and whether his marriage could survive this rocky beginning. 3 days passed with no word from James or Sarah. I returned to my routine, working at the hospital, tending to my garden, having dinner with friends, but thoughts of the wedding disaster lingered in the back of my mind. On Wednesday evening, I received a text from James, asking if he could come over the next day to talk. I agreed, wondering what this meeting would bring. When he arrived on Thursday afternoon, I was surprised to see him carrying a large envelope. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began after declining my offer of tea or coffee, "and I've made some decisions I wanted to share with you first." He opened the envelope and spread several papers on my coffee table. I recognized them immediately. They were financial statements for joint accounts he had opened with Sarah, along with their lease agreement and other legal documents. "Sarah and I had a long talk," James continued, his voice steadier than it had been during his last visit. "I told her that her behavior at the wedding was unacceptable and that she needed to apologize to you if we were going to move forward together." I held my breath, waiting for him to continue. Noticing how determined he looked, so much like his father when faced with difficult decisions. "She refused. Not only refused, but said she was glad she did it because you needed to be put in your place." A cold feeling spread through my chest at his words. My son noticed my expression and quickly continued, "That's when I realized this wasn't just about the wedding. This was about respect and values. The kind you and Dad taught me were non-negotiable." He pointed to the papers on the table. "I'm separating our finances, and I've told her I need time to reconsider whether this marriage is right for me." I was stunned by his decisiveness, but proud of him for standing up for his values. "James, are you sure about this? Marriage is serious, and I never wanted to cause problems between you two." He shook his head firmly. "You didn't cause this, Mom. Sarah's actions and her refusal to take responsibility for them caused this. The wedding incident just opened my eyes to patterns I've been ignoring." He explained that Sarah had isolated him from several friends over the past year, always finding fault with people who were close to him. She had also been spending money recklessly from their joint savings, justifying it as investments in their future while criticizing his more frugal approach. "Dad always said that how someone handles money reveals their character," James mused, running his fingers along the edge of a bank statement. "I should have paid more attention to that wisdom." Over the next few weeks, James stayed in my guest room while he figured out his next steps. Sarah alternated between angry demands that he return home and tearful pleas for reconciliation, but she never once offered an apology to either of us. One evening, as we were preparing dinner together, a routine we had established since his return, James looked up from the vegetables he was chopping and said, "I filed for an annulment today." The knife in my hand stilled, and I turned to face him, searching his expression for signs of doubt or regret. I found none. "The lawyer says we have grounds, since it's been less than a month, and there are other factors." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't press. Instead, I simply asked, "Are you at peace with this decision?" He nodded slowly. "More at peace than I've felt in a long time, actually. It's like I've been holding my breath without realizing it, and now I can finally exhale." Sarah didn't accept the annulment without a fight. She hired an aggressive lawyer who tried to claim that James had misrepresented himself before the marriage and that she was entitled to a significant settlement. What she didn't know was that my late husband had been meticulous about setting up a trust for James that was protected from such claims. When her lawyer realized there would be no big payoff, Sarah's approach changed. She began calling mutual friends, spinning a story about how I had manipulated James into leaving her out of jealousy and an inability to let go of my son. Some people believed her, and James lost a few friends in the process. One night, after a particularly difficult day of legal negotiations, I found him sitting on our back porch, staring at the stars. "Do you think I gave up too easily?" he asked without looking at me. "Should I have tried harder to make it work?" I took a seat beside him, considering his question carefully before answering. "Marriage takes work, yes, but it also requires a foundation of mutual respect and shared values. Without those, you're building on sand." I thought about my own marriage to James's father. 32 years of partnership that had weathered job losses, health scares, and the everyday challenges of life. Your father and I disagreed plenty of times, but we never lost sight of our respect for each other. We never tried to hurt each other deliberately, or put the other person down, especially not in public. James nodded, seeming to find comfort in my words. That's what I want someday, what you and Dad had. He turned to look at me, his expression serious. I'm grateful you canceled those wedding payments, Mom. If you hadn't, I might have kept making excuses for behavior that shouldn't be excused. We sat in companionable silence after that, watching the night sky together and finding peace in the knowledge that sometimes the most painful endings make way for better beginnings. The annulment was finalized 3 months after the wedding. James decided to accept a job offer in a city 2 hours away, not running from his problems, but moving toward a fresh opportunity. It's close enough that I can come home for Sunday dinners, he joked as he packed his belongings into a moving truck, but far enough that I can start fresh. I helped him find an apartment and get settled, my heart both heavy and hopeful as I watched him begin this new chapter. On the day I was driving back home, after helping him move in, he handed me an envelope. Don't open this until you get home, he instructed with a mysterious smile. When I finally opened it that evening, I found a check for the exact amount I had spent on the wedding, along with a note. Consider this the first installment of my debt to you, not just financial, but for showing me what real love and respect look like. I'll keep paying it forward. I called him immediately, insisting I couldn't accept the money, but he was adamant. I took out a small loan to cover it, he explained. It's important to me to make this right, and every payment will remind me to never settle for less than I deserve in relationships. I couldn't argue with his reasoning, though I deposited the check with mixed emotions. 6 months after the wedding I received a surprising message from Sarah's mother, Patricia. We had always been cordial but never close, and I hadn't heard from her since the wedding. Her message was brief, but significant. I owe you an apology. I raised Sarah to believe she was entitled to the best of everything without having to earn it or show gratitude. Watching how this situation unfolded has forced me to face some hard truths about my parenting. I'm sorry for what you and James experienced. I appreciated her honesty, though it didn't undo the hurt that had been caused. James thrived in his new city and new job. He made friends, developed hobbies, and eventually started dating again, more cautiously this time, and with a clearer understanding of what he wanted in a partner. We spoke often and maintained our close relationship, though I was careful to give him space to build his independent life. As for me, I decided to use some of the repaid wedding money to fulfill a long-deferred dream of my own, taking a photography course and traveling to Iceland to capture the northern lights. My late husband had always encouraged this passion, but life and responsibilities had put it on hold. On the anniversary of what would have been James's first wedding anniversary, I found myself standing under a spectacular display of green and purple lights dancing across the Arctic sky. I thought about the painful events that had led to this moment and felt an unexpected sense of gratitude. Life rarely follows the paths we expect it to take. What had seemed like a horrible humiliation at that wedding reception had ultimately set both James and me free in different ways. He had escaped a relationship that would have slowly diminished him, and I had finally given myself permission to pursue dreams I had set aside. Sometimes, standing up for yourself means walking away, even when every instinct tells you to stay and fight. I took a photo of the northern lights and sent it to James with a simple message. Sometimes the most beautiful views come after the darkest nights. He responded almost immediately. Like mother, like son, we both know when to hold our ground. I smiled at his words, feeling the truth of them settle comfortably in my heart. The journey hadn't been easy, but we had both emerged stronger, wiser, and more true to ourselves than before. A year and a half after the wedding incident, James called me with excitement in his voice. Mom, I've met someone I want you to meet. Her name was Olivia, a pediatric nurse at the hospital where he now worked. Unlike his whirlwind romance with Sarah, this relationship had developed slowly over months of friendship and mutual respect. When I finally met her at a dinner James arranged, I was struck by the easy way they interacted. No power struggles, no subtle put-downs, just genuine affection and partnership. After dinner, while James was paying the bill, Olivia turned to me and said something I'll never forget. James told me everything that happened with his first marriage. I want you to know how much I respect the difficult choice you made at that wedding. It couldn't have been easy to walk away, but you taught him an invaluable lesson about self-respect." Her words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Sometimes, the hardest decisions we make echo forward in ways we could never anticipate. 2 years after the failed wedding, I received an unexpected letter with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note from Sarah. "I've been in therapy for the past year and have come to recognize my toxic behaviors and their roots. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I understand now why you did what you did, and you were right to do it. James deserved better than who I was then." The letter continued with reflections on her journey toward becoming more self-aware and the work she was still doing. I sat with the letter for a long time, feeling a complex mixture of emotions, vindication, compassion, and a quiet acknowledgement that growth can come from even the most painful experiences. I never responded to the letter, but I kept it as a reminder that people can change when they're willing to face difficult truths about themselves. Some lessons come at a high price, but that doesn't make them any less valuable. James and Olivia got engaged after dating for 3 years. Their engagement party was a small, intimate gathering at a local restaurant. No extravagance, no show, just genuine celebration with people they loved. When James asked if I would help with wedding planning, I happily agreed but insisted they make their own decisions about what they wanted. "This is your day, not mine," I told them, remembering the painful lesson from before. The wedding they planned reflected their shared values, meaningful rather than showy, focused on commitment rather than spectacle. The night before the ceremony, Olivia came to me with a small gift box. Inside was a beautiful brooch with a note for the mother of the groom, whose wisdom and strength helped make tomorrow possible. "We would be honored if you would give a toast at our reception." The gesture brought tears to my eyes, healing a wound I hadn't realized was still tender. The day of James and Olivia's wedding dawned bright and clear. As I helped Olivia with her dress, simple and elegant, like her, she confessed that she had been nervous about meeting me at first. "James spoke about you with such admiration. I worried I couldn't measure up," she admitted with a smile. "But then I realized he wasn't looking for someone like his mother. He was looking for someone who shared the values his mother taught him." It was perhaps the most beautiful compliment anyone had ever given me about my parenting. When the time came for my toast at their reception, I rose with a full heart, champagne glass in hand. The room quieted, and this time, there was only warmth and expectation in the faces turned toward me. "To James and Olivia," I began, my voice steady and clear. "May your marriage be built on the foundation of respect, partnership, and joy that you've already established. And may you always remember that love isn't just about standing together in the easy moments, it's about growing together through the challenging ones." Looking back now, 5 years after that disastrous first wedding, I can see how that painful moment changed the course of all our lives. James and Olivia now have a beautiful 2-year-old daughter named Eleanor, after my mother. Sarah, according to mutual friends, completed her therapy and is in a healthy relationship with someone new. As for me, I've expanded my photography hobby into a small business, leading tours for other amateur photographers to capture natural wonders around the world. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as our worst moments. That evening when I walked out of my son's wedding reception, heartbreaking and humiliation burning in my cheeks, I could never have imagined the growth and happiness that would eventually spring from that painful soil. The universe has a way of redirecting us when we're headed down the wrong path, if only we have the courage to listen and change course. When Eleanor was born, James and Olivia asked me to be in the delivery room, a privilege I hadn't expected, but treasured deeply. Holding my granddaughter for the first time, I marveled at how life circles back with new beginnings. "She has your eyes," Olivia whispered tiredly from the hospital bed, and indeed, looking down at Eleanor's tiny face, I could see my own eyes looking back at me. Later that evening, as James and I sat together in the hospital cafeteria while Olivia rested, he took my hand across the table. "You know, if you hadn't walked out that day and canceled those payments, I might still be trapped in a marriage that was wrong from the start," he said thoughtfully. "And Eleanor might never have existed." The thought was sobering, how one moment of standing up for yourself could alter the future so profoundly. "I'm just glad you found the strength to make difficult choices too," I told him. That's where the real courage was. Last month, James was offered a promotion that would bring him, Olivia, and Eleanor back to our hometown. When he called to tell me the news, his excitement was palpable. "We've already started looking at houses within 10 minutes of you," he said. Eleanor should grow up knowing her grandmother. The joy I felt at his words was tempered by a moment of concern. I didn't want them making this decision for my sake alone. "Are you sure this is what you both want?" I asked carefully. "You've built such a wonderful life where you are." His response reassured me completely. "Mom, one of the most important lessons I learned from everything that happened is that family, real, healthy, supportive family, is precious. Olivia and I want Eleanor to grow up surrounded by that kind of love. This is our choice, and we're making it together." Those words together highlighted the difference between his first marriage and the partnership he now shared with Olivia. I've often reflected on what might have happened if I had reacted differently at that first wedding. If I had swallowed my humiliation, finished my toast despite Sarah's interruption, and continued to fund the celebration, perhaps James would have stayed in that marriage longer, trying to make it work despite the fundamental lack of respect at its core. Perhaps I would have become the mother-in-law who was tolerated but never welcomed, allowed brief, supervised visits with future grandchildren but never truly included. Or perhaps things would have unraveled anyway, just more slowly and painfully over time. We can never know the paths not taken, but I've made peace with the one I chose. Sometimes love means setting boundaries. Sometimes respect means walking away. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to accept treatment that diminishes your worth. The story of that wedding day and its aftermath has become something of a family legend, not spoken of with bitterness now, but with a sense of wonder at how life's most painful moments can become turning points that lead to unexpected joy. Last week, as James, Olivia, Eleanor, and I sat around my dining table for Sunday dinner, a tradition we've happily resumed since their move back, James raised his glass in a toast. "To Mom," he said with a smile that reached his eyes, "who taught me that sometimes you have to walk away to find your way home." Olivia and I clinked glasses, while Eleanor, not understanding but wanting to participate, tapped her sippy cup against all of our glasses with delighted giggles. In that moment, surrounded by genuine love and respect, I felt a circle complete itself. The wedding that fell apart had cleared the way for something much more precious to be built, not just a better marriage for James, but a family bound together by choice, respect, and unwavering support through life's inevitable challenges. I've learned that standing up for yourself isn't always dramatic or loud. Sometimes it's as quiet as walking away with dignity intact. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, "No, I won't accept this treatment." The strength to do this doesn't always come easily or naturally. It's cultivated through experiences that test us, through painful moments that force us to choose between peace and suffering. Often, we must choose the latter, even when it breaks our hearts to do so. On difficult days, I remind myself of the lesson Eleanor is already learning through our family's story, that true love has nothing to do with allowing yourself to be diminished or disrespected. Rather, it flourishes in the soil of mutual regard, kindness, and the courage to hold each other to the highest standards of behavior. This is the legacy I hope to leave not just for my granddaughter, but for anyone who hears our story.